to ask you guys first, because there's so many questions that were kind of left, and we also had some lingering things that it may be great for, instead of me moderating and asking you guys questions, is to first field questions from you guys and see if we can really get the conversation flowing that way. I want each and every one of you guys to get a chance to ask questions of those on the stage. But first, before we get started with questions, I'll have each of our advisory board members to introduce themselves, give them a little bit background around your area of expertise and kind of your area of responsibilities at your organization or company.
Perfect. There we go. Make sure that's working. So Eric Klein, I'm a director of what we like to call a mobile and wireless practice at VDC Research. We're a traditional market research firm. What I love about my job is I get to talk to a lot of different end users in every industry. I like to say that no two companies are alike, and that really makes it quite a big challenge to kind of understand what their problems are and how they're trying to solve them with technology. So we do a lot of end user research. We survey end users. We write market reports. We collect a lot of data, and that's how I get my intel.
Isaac Sacolick. I run a company called StarCIO. I'm an ex-CTO and CIO with a background in running transformation programs. I wrote a book called Driving Digital, which is all about bringing agile and DevOps and data practices to the enterprise and small and medium-sized businesses. I also write for InfoWorld, for CIO, and for my blog, and happy to be here.
So Stephanie, let me get this straight. The dog ate your questions, so you don't have questions anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I do have a new puppy, so maybe.
So we have an analyst, we have an author, we have visionaries, and then you have me. So you see, you can win a seat at the table, even if you aren't qualified. No, it's only good. My name is Tim Scannell. I'm with the CIO Executive Council, which is a community of IT leaders, a global community. We have about 400 to 500 members in that community. We provide leadership programs. We bring our CIOs and IT leaders together to discuss topics of interest. We have training sessions. We have mentors. Ken Piddington is one. If he's here, I can't see him up there. That mentor other CIOs or mentor IT leaders who aspire to be CIOs. We work very closely with the IDG network in terms of awards and things like that. We are all about. We had a president of IDG once who kept on saying, "You've got to take the leadership. You got to tell these people where everything is going." And I kept on saying, "We can't do that. It's not our job." I said, "We have to listen to them, and we're going to go along for the ride. But we are just the catalyst. We make things happen. We spark that conversation that brings people together to make decisions, and that's the beauty of the CIO Executive Council." My background: I've been a journalist and an editor for years and years. I was an analyst for 7 years. I've sort of been a jack of all trades, bouncing around. I love the industry. I love the excitement. And here we go again with really great technology.
So maybe before we take questions, maybe talk a little bit about what are some of the core technology areas or enterprise or business areas where you have expertise in, so that way the audience kind of knows our background. I'll let you start, Tim. We'll go back this way so you guys can kind of get a good feel of what our background is. Then maybe, kind of lay out some bullet items. And that way we can open it up, and if you have questions specifically related to some of our core expertise areas, we can facilitate it that way. And then I might have a few questions, but.
All right, so I have the easy job. That's great. So speakers before us talked about, agile teams and translate intelligence at the edge, dynamic architectures and things like that. Customer support, customer first, cloud first, mobile first. Who's on first? All that other stuff. So my background is like I said, I covered the industry for a long time, for nearly probably more than 4 decades. But I've always had a pragmatic approach to technology. I've seen a lot of technology out there that is technology for technology's sake. I talked to a lot of companies who are developing things and going down the technology road. Oh, we have to do something in AI, whether it's a POC or we have to do pilot projects. We've got to do something. And the question I ask is why? Look at what is needed in your organization, and maybe technology doesn't apply. And one of the trends I'm finding now is if you look at areas like outsourcing, which was the big trend, all of a sudden companies are saying, "No, wait a minute, I really don't need these 3 applications to be outsourced. I'm going to take them back on-prem, and I'll do some outsourcing. I'll do multi-cloud, I'll do hybrid cloud, but only when it really needs it. And, you know, we talked a little bit about shadow IT, and that was like a no-no before. Got to get rid of shadow IT. But now they're saying, you know what, with agile and work with the business side, you know, the business people are pretty bright. You know, they come up with some great ideas. So maybe we'll just let them do a little bit of shadow IT. And sometimes IT doesn't even have to get involved in it because they're paying it for their budget, really doesn't overlap us. And as I said, our organization is comprised of a lot of major companies. And I'll just tell you one company, Colliers International, is going down this route, and they're big in real estate and housing across the United States. But, you know, shadow IT is so successful for them now, and they did the outsourcing and all that agile, that they have turned it over to the business side, and it's never worked smoothly or more smoothly. So that's, you know, ending up, so it's pragmatic technology with a purpose.
I actually have a background in artificial intelligence. I studied that in the 90s before it was truly available to most enterprises. I also did a lot of application development. I've run agile teams. I've brought DevOps into enterprises before. And I've actually implemented a lot of low-code and citizen development platforms in organizations. So that's what I do a lot of writing about. What I do a lot on the side, really my core business is around change management and organizational change, getting enterprises to think differently and strategically about data and technology, how to think about becoming a product organization, and how to compete differently over the next 5 years as the evolution of technology is forcing every business to rethink who their competition is. So I'm kind of all over the place, but really about how technology is transforming organizations.
Perfect. Yeah, so, you know, I'm kind of all over the place too myself, unfortunately, and that's kind of the way we are. I think all of us are. And we talked quite a bit about some of those trends already and had some pretty good discussions, I would say. You know, for me, I really focus on, you know, as I said, mobile and wireless practice at my firm. I've been really writing about mobile enablement and what that means to organizations and how they can get more productivity out of their workforce by providing them with a device that actually is a business tool. And when you start bringing analytics into the fray, you can start dealing with contextual information that's in real time. We talked about real time already quite a bit. And that real time element really can be transformative to the business, as folks like myself like to say. And this is really very interesting when you add analytics into the mix. And this is something I've been studying for quite a bit lately, because when you talk about mission critical or business critical, as I like to say, there's really a lot of ways for organizations to enable their workers in the way they run their business to be more reactive rather than, be more proactive rather than reactive. And a lot of folks are constantly dealing with this, but some of the new tools and software that's out there really is allowing that. And, you know, it gets down to very mundane things such as the battery life on a mobile device and being able to figure out why that battery is draining. It could be a bad app, but it gets much further than that in terms of really being able to prevent downtime within your workforce and really having your workers be productive. And I think I'll close with saying, you know, more and more of everyone's workforce here, whether you're in retail, whether you're in, you know, energy, whether you're in financial services, you know, all the, I think, industries that Stephanie laid out in the beginning, transportation. A bigger and bigger slice of that workforce within those companies, and probably every company, is becoming more dependent on mobility for their day-to-day. So that's really the area I quite mostly focus on. And I can go on. I mean, we bring applications into the mix as well. And I start, you know, we just talked about low-code and had a good spirited discussion about low-code, no-code and the impacts on that. You know, so these things are going to continue to progress and change the way companies have to keep up with change and adopt modern technologies.
Thanks. That's a good background. And just to add on to that, at Compass, we focus on the mobile and wireless solutions and technology, as well as we're doing a lot of projects around the Internet of Things, fleet and asset management, fleet tracking, asset tracking. We, you know, sample projects. We did something recently to cover the aviation ground support equipment market, how they're connecting everything on the, you know, airport operations side. So from things like that to doing a lot of projects around smart cities And when I think about smart cities, it's hitting every industry. It's hitting energy, transportation, traffic management, first responders. So a lot of government-specific breakout groups and areas, and even education as we think about public universities and how they interact with the city. We're doing a lot of research around 5G, the impact of 5G. Right now, all the technology vendors, we do a lot of work with tech vendors, they're really focused on getting feedback from you guys as they're really exploring use cases. What does 5G really mean to enterprises, to government, to universities? So that's a big area of focus. And then lastly, all of the emerging technology. We talked about robotics, AI, machine learning, just small things like neural networks, cognitive computing, all of these things. Tech vendors are trying to get their own arms around that so they could better communicate and provide value to you guys. So we kind of bring and marry some of that research, because really it's less focused on the technology itself, more focused on what does it mean to the business and how is it going to change the business, how it's going to improve the business, cost, et cetera. So that's kind of all of our background. So we love to open it up now to questions from our audience and get and help maybe facilitate some feedback to you guys, because I know we had a question over here earlier, and maybe raise your hand if you have questions for our panelists.
Hi, I'm Sudipto. I work for a nonprofit called Catholic Relief. So this evening we talked about the importance of having a good partnership between the business and IT. So within my organization, I manage the team of architects. So the team is very excited to learn about IoT and AI and big data and things like that, but they are not so much interested to learn about the business. And what I've experienced is that the business is not going to give you the seat at the table unless you are talking their language and you are willing to understand what is their actual problem instead of trying to convince them on AI or like IoT. So would you have any ideas on how to manage the learning for the team?
So here's the cold hard truth, is that there are going to be some people in IT that will resist, and they will just not go along with that. And they want to stay in their desk, they want to do their coding, and want nothing to do with the business. And they're going to be dinosaurs, which is too bad. What you have to do is, and I think somebody touched upon this earlier, one of the speakers, is how do you get people to collaborate on the business side? You have to build trust. And the way you do that is I think a lot of companies are relying on advocates they place on the business side, or a business relationship manager who's your liaison on the business side. You have to have somebody between there, betwixt and between the business and the IT people that are trusted on both sides, and then that makes the flow of conversation go. You have to teach IT to speak business language. And this is happening, this is a huge problem. There's a college in California, major university, I think it's UCal San Diego, massive campus. They've started a digital literacy program, but it's focused on tech people, because tech people tend to talk in their own language to other tech people. So digital literacy means, yay, buddy, tone it down so everyone can understand that. So they actually have a course in that. And on the other hand, there's another university that wants to get the business side involved with what they're doing in technology. So they launched a program called Robotics University. And what they're doing is they are teaching coding and basic coding and IT ways of thinking, logical ways of thinking, to the business side. They even have a Six Sigma program that started in IT, and it gravitated to the business side because they're looking over the fence saying, what's all this excitement? They have 1,800 people now signed up for that on both the business and IT side. It has to be that communications and collaboration.
We're hearing more of that as well. My work with Texas A&M University, they're thinking more strategically from their graduate programs and undergraduate programs to bring together different disciplines. So like the engineers they have a special program that they're working with the medical school department to work on projects together to solve problems. They're also, when we worked through the curriculum, we also talked about the need to have technically minded folks that better understand business processes and operations. So what they're doing is looking at evolving their curriculum to meet that future need for us businesses, because the data scientists and data engineers that we want to hire, we want them to not only have that technical background and have those engineering skills, but we also want them to take a step back and think more strategically. So some of the educational programs are evolving, which is going to help, but I think we also need to think as organizations, what do we do internally from a, HR teams have to think about this from a training and coaching and, the collaborative teams. I love the liaison. I think that's a great idea. But so we have to think internally, how do we really bring together the pieces? And so I think there's probably a lot of ideas, and maybe you guys have other.
Ask the architects who they think their customer is. I did some work with a DevOps group who wanted to basically do everything. They wanted to do CI/CD and infrastructure as code and standard templates and have sandboxes, and they wanted to do everything. And I looked at them and said, who are you doing this for? Who are your end customers? What are they looking for? And it may not be your customers as a business, but it starts getting them to think that they're not just doing technology for technology's sake. They're not just doing things because they read it in one of our magazines or on a website. There's an end customer in mind, which means there's a business value that they're trying to deliver, that there's somebody who's going to sign off in terms of what they're delivering for them, and there's somebody who's actually paying for that technology that they're actually going to invest in. And so I think that's an easy way to get started. Even though it's not necessarily teaching them the business, at least it's teaching them the vernacular of the business.
Thinking differently. Good question.
So my name is Mike. I work for a company called Ardent Mills, but I spent 20 years in Cargill, if you're familiar with Cargill. Very large, privately held company. And I don't know if this is more of a question or a comment, but looking for feedback. If we look back 20 years in history, most of our IT organizations were embedded in our business units, or they were embedded in our locations, and they knew our businesses, they knew our locations. They worked for a contact at that location. And so it was kind of agile before it was really agile, right? And we started to do a pendulum shift that said, I need to know my total IT cost. I need to know my total IT spend. I have to manage an architecture. I want to make sure we're making the right conscious decisions, right? And so we've done that shift for the last 20 years, which is we're standardizing IT. We're bringing in enterprise architecture. We're building these massive IT organizations. And what we're talking about now with Agile is we're starting to say, I'm maybe no longer pushing the IT back to a business, but I'm doing it to a product line. And what I've done is I've made technology very accessible, so I can give that control to a business, or I can give that control to a product line manager, someone who doesn't necessarily have to have the technical expertise, especially with low-code, no-code type of solutions. And so my question or comment is, right, we see the pendulum shift from what Agile was 20 years ago to where it is today, and curious kind of on the feedback of how do you stop the pendulum from going all the way back where you still have enterprise architecture, you still have visibility into the cost of IT, even though I'm not there, still have visibility into the security around all products that are delivered, whether it was IT or not. Kind of just looking for kind of feedback, and if you guys have seen that type of change in the industry, or what you guys are seeing in that space. And if that makes sense, or if I need to clarify more, let me know. It made more sense in my head maybe than the way it came out.
I think it makes perfect sense, and I'll tell you what's driving it. So there are so many things happening today that are impacting Agile and everything we're trying to do with digital transformation. I'm kind of a yin and yang type of guy. So if you look at Agile, it's a great concept and it works most of the time, but all of a sudden you have things like massive outsourcing. So multiple outsourcing partners that all of a sudden they're trying to make part of that Agile team, and it's just too difficult. It's not going to work, but you need those outsourced partners. You have multi-cloud environments which are changing the dynamics of running the IT organization. All of a sudden the code jockeys are still code jockeys, but they're not in control. You have the people who know technology, know how it can be applied effectively, and they can talk to the business side. So these are the things that are changing things, and it's going to make it, I don't think that pendulum is going to switch. I think it's going to go even further out towards something different that we're moving toward. We're not quite there yet.
I would say too is looking at some of the companies, just doing research on some of the companies that have Agile practices in place, is that I expect to see some hybrid, just like we see hybrid cloud. I think we're going to see hybrid Agile or workforces from a hierarchy perspective. We may still maintain those IT departments that have kind of that top-down and overarching where we have standards across, but we also are integrating and we have different teams that are part of agile practices that we need to have in place. So I think we're going to have kind of that mesh, but I think how we get there is the fact that we actually have to collaborate and think through our culture different from a IT culture to an OT culture. Are we really starting to work more collaboratively together, or are these liaisons really supporting or facilitating that? And maybe that means new roles. Maybe that means that the executive teams are going to have to think very differently in how they work with their IT teams and they work with their line of business or product. I think there's a lot of things left to be, said around how that evolves, but I think it'll shift somewhere in between. I don't think that we're going to go full-fledged one or the other.
Yeah, I also think a big part of that pendulum swing is just the fact that CIOs have a 3 to 6 year tenure, right? And so they come in and then, one of them is pure waterfall, PMP certified and starts doing everything top down, isn't executing well or isn't executing well enough. And so that person gets replaced. They look for somebody who's the opposite of that. They bring in the agile person. The agile person gets a certain far of the way distance, can actually start executing, but can't articulate a 6 or a 12 or an 18-month roadmap, right? Because Agile isn't very good at that. You have to put other processes around that to make that successful. And so some people in the organization get upset by that, and they start swinging the pendulum the other way. So I think a lot of what you said, Stephanie, is the heart of fixing this, which is about changing the culture. And really thinking about the right mix of teams that bring success. That can be a mix of outsourcing teams as well as employees. So a mix of business, technology, subject matter expertise with bringing in outsources that sometimes can bring the ability to scale, but also to bring in some new technology skills along the way. Then also looking at different platforms. A big reason why organizations actually centralize is not just about the cost factor, but they want to centralize on certain platforms. They want to get certain expertise. They want the integration to happen. And they know if they just create a bunch of silos, that's just not going to happen. So I think the element that brings it all together is making sure that you can tell a story that, yes, IT is hard. You're going to fail. You're going to learn from your mistakes. You're going to take some measured risks, but you're going to constantly deliver along the way and be able to market and sell to that story. And that's how I think we get rid of
some companies just can't be changed. I mean, you look at a company like MITRE Corporation, and they have multiple CIOs. They're all engineers. None of them aspire to be corporate officers. They are very happy being technology officers. Other organizations, the CIO is elevated to the point he's talking to the board. He's a corporate officer. He's respected as a corporate decision maker, not just a technology decision maker. And what's happening within those organizations, they're appointing people or trying to find people that can run these small teams, call them SWAT teams. The problem, we'll call team number 5 because they're experts in that. You'll have CIOs doing that, a CIO of customer satisfaction. But you need that other CIO to be up there. But not every organization is going to be equipped to do that.
And that, the last thing I'd add is that resistance to change, is just pervasive. A company like MITRE is a perfect example. Unfortunately, that's the case in so many companies today that they want to hold on to that legacy for whatever their reason is. And that holds people back from getting that innovation that they want. So that'd be, my last comment on it.
Hi there.
really hard to see questions.
Is this thing on? Yeah. Okay. I'm Tom from First Ontario Credit Union. I love the lining of that guy's jacket. I want it. I have a question about no-code, low-code. You're talking about this as if it's actually ready for prime time, and I'm wondering what your sense of that is. Can we really use those tools to build sophisticated, truly integrated systems and applications? If not, do you see that happening anytime soon? Because I still have a real problem getting coders, and I still need them. So what do you see as a trajectory there? Because I remember 20 years ago, we were already talking about 4GL, and coders would be phased out within a matter of years. So where do we stand? Where's the technology, and where's it going?
So So my answer to that is yes, but I've been doing low code in some form for over 20 years, post 4G. So the but part is picking the right types of applications where you can get speed to market and get an increased ability to maintain your applications without having to do all the custom code that naturally goes into that. I find that in every organization. There was a woman in this area who asked a question, how do we survive doing more with less? We have fewer people. It's harder to get the right talent, right? So we need some ways to cheat. And cheating is partially finding platforms where we can do more with less expertise, that we can continue to support the applications and enhance them and do them without having all the talent, the expense, and the technical debt that goes with it, as well as all the infrastructure that it takes to do something when you do it by yourself. There's actually two different types of platforms here. So, and the vernacular has changed quite a bit over the last few years. So when I talk about low code, it's really about tools that go to developers that make them more productive, right? So the end user of a low code platform is typically a developer. They're working in a specific set of types of applications. You probably need to do a lot of those. So if you have to do a lot of event-driven applications, you might look at Vantic as an example. But again, it's better than and faster and cheaper, more supportable, more secure than hiring a team of Java developers or a team of .NET developers or PHP developers to build that same application. When we talk about no code, we're really talking about applications that are really organizationally focused for the most part. They're largely replacing things like Excel spreadsheets and workflows that are email driven. Someone asked a question about how do you work with millennials? Well, millennials are pretty hands-on in terms of technologies. They like solving problems, but guess what? A lot of them don't want to be in IT. And they're subject matter experts, so instead of putting a business analyst in front of a department to learn what their workflow is, to go write requirements up, to do an agile process, to build a business process in a proprietary platform, you can take a low-code or a no-code platform, give that same millennial access to them, give them some governance around it, right? And that's what I think the IT department has to be good at, is defining the governance around these platforms so that the applications are built in a secure and maintainable way. And then you could see, instead of having hundreds or thousands of spreadsheets or emails going back and forth, replaced with Slack channels going back and forth, you actually have a governed applications that's versioned, that's tested and usable going after that. So I'm very bullish, obviously, about using these platforms, but in an age where we have too much to build, we have to look for ways to do things that enable our departments to do it more efficiently.
And it just demystifies technology, the whole software. We demystified technology, and now everyone has a smartphone. It's easy to use. You don't have to, you don't have to be a coder or anything to use it. We have to do the same thing to software. Everybody knows who Dan Bricklin is. He's the creator of VisiCalc.
Yeah.
Missed the other by that much, but really bright guy. I sat down with him about a year ago, and he is a no-code, low-code fanatic. And he sat there and basically you just say, well, this is what I want to do. You write down what you want to do, and it just zips off and it does it. Anybody can build something. And if you look what's happening in schools and STEM programs right now, they're not teaching you COBOL. They're not saying, here's 3,000 punch cards, put it through the reader, as they did to me. They're teaching you how to think logically. And I don't know if Ken is still out there someplace, but we had a discussion earlier, as a sort of pre-discussion to our session tomorrow. And I love the term he used is you don't teach people how to code or about technology. You teach people to understand the art of the possible. And I think that was a great phrase. And I told you I was going to steal it, didn't I?
Well, that's good. I would say, too, is what we're seeing on the IoT side is I work a lot with the different tech companies and the platform vendors. There's a lot of them that say they have a platform, but it's not a true platform. But what's happening is we can't scale sensor networks and all of these things that we're connecting if we don't have these platforms that are modular, that are drag and drop, that are helping us put together the if and then act or predict or do these things or escalate or alert these people without that being built. So a lot of the development happening on the IoT side is they're thinking about that. So you don't necessarily need to train the folks that are managing those endpoint devices They don't need to know how to code. They just need to learn the platform and think about different things that they want to solve, and the system itself is helping facilitate that. I think that's where we're seeing a lot more on the platform side for IoT, and I think that, as low code as we can get is what we're at, right? If we can get to no code, that's where AI is also facilitating some things, because what artificial intelligence does is it looks at patterns, it looks at anomalies that are happening with the data that we're collecting, and it tells us to act and do things without human interaction, right? And so some of those machines and some of the machine learning side is going to take action without any human intervention. And so that helps also alleviate some of the human and manual operation that we so long have relied on. So those are some advancements that we see taken off very rapidly on the machine learning side.
And I have one last comment. I'm also bullish on the space. I think it's a very important space in the market right now. I think that Lane from Vantic mentioned some case studies he was going to be alluding to tomorrow. I pay close attention to those, because that's what I always look for when I'm looking for validation if a market's real. I've been tracking the space for several years myself. I've written about a lot of the firms that participate in the space, in the low-code, no-code space. Been plenty of acquisitions in the space, interest from large vendors in this space, SAP, Oracle, MicroStrategy, IBM. All the big players, are Citrix even made an acquisition. So everyone's interested in this space because they see the opportunity to give developers more tools to do exactly what you were saying, right? Take advantage of that opportunity to repurpose a lot of the code and be more productive, right? That's what it's all about, is keeping your workforce productive, and that goes for developers too. So I think it's a very valuable space.
There's also a lot of investment on the conference side. So
yes,
a lot of the big tech companies are holding their own developer conferences, which they have contests, they have real live work sessions, and they're really putting that hands-on approach, and they're investing very heavily in DevOps and developer conferences. So that also gives even further rise to the developer community. It's taking off, and they're accepting it, and they're looking at ways to really get more. They want to be more interactive. They want that open code. They want to play with it. And so I think that as the millennials coming in and all the younger workforce coming in, all of that open code just allows them to just play with that, and it's advancing rather rapidly.
Yeah, and I think the term millennials has been tossed around, and there's a big stigma about millennials. I'm certainly not a millennial. Okay, I'm an experienced person.
You look like a millennial.
On a good day in a shadowy room. So millennials get a bad rap. Millennials, basically what they want when they're looking for a job is, first of all, they're not brand conscious. They don't want to work for Coca-Cola because it's Coca-Cola. They want to have a job where their worth is valued. They want to have a job where, as mentioned earlier, they're part of a team, but there has to be an end result. What are we doing as part of this team? They may only stay in a company for 3, 4, 5 years, traditionally. So during that time, before they hop on the next job, they want to do something worthwhile. Certainly they don't want to work, if anybody's here from Altria, I'm sorry, they don't want to work for Philip Morris. But here's the good news. We have Generation Z coming up. So Generation Z are the seniors in high school going into college, and they're just like millennials but different. They grew up with the technology. They can use the technology like there's no tomorrow, but it doesn't impress them. It's a tool. It's going back to being a constructive tool. They want to work for a company. When you talk to them, they'll probably work for a company for 6 or 7 years. They've been collaborating and Venmoing money back and forth and chatting. When somebody's sitting there, let's chat instead of talking. But in a corporate environment, they want to go to a meeting. They want to look at you face to face and be part of that group collaborative effort. So it's going back to that. And they also want you to, they want you to take an interest in their personal journey. And this is something new in IT organizations, and it takes some effort. That every employee that's in IT that's worthwhile, and even those that aren't, that may show potential, you have to map out a personal journey. And it's an effort, and you have to let them know you're doing it, because when they come to work in the morning, they have to know that not only that they're giving to something worthwhile, but my journey matters to this company. Because here's the kicker. With Generation Z, they have no allegiance to a company, just like Millennials, but if a strong leader, a charismatic, a strong leader leaves the company and they looked at that person as a mentor, guess what? Generation Z is going with them. They will follow that person to other jobs. And that's going to be a significant problem going forward, especially as we have this huge IT skills gap.
Melanie?
So, Tim, you know who I work for. I'm Altria, by the way. Thank you. Bought a stake in Jewel. We own part of Jewel, but we're kind of there. When we look at digital disruptors, you know, we mentioned 5G, but there's also Wi-Fi 6 that's coming out.
Yep.
Some of these other AI, Internet of Things, your beacon technology is starting to make a comeback. We're looking at faster ways to do more things with less, right? We talked about this in the just staffing part of this. Cybersecurity, though, has been the leader in all of our IT budgets. Mobile has taken a back seat. Your AI and some of this other stuff has taken a back seat. So how do we make our space exciting enough to our IT leaders to trump cybersecurity, or at least be on that same level playing field? Because when you look at these mobile devices, and many of us have one or more or multiples because of the jobs that we do, we have got to be able to tell the story about just how important it is to have this secured just as much as the laptop on our desk. Because right now, there is a black hole in that department around mobile. They don't understand it. They don't understand how it works. They don't know how to secure it. They don't understand the app security because it's not their thing. They're all about perimeter security. They're all about how to make sure that the bad actor doesn't get in through the door. But they're not looking at the most accessible piece of this, and that is sitting on the table. So how would you talk to all of us about the best way to sort of trump them and say, put the focus back into mobile, because the mobile is the center part of this universe. Everything that we do centers around the mobility.
So let me just, before I turn over to the other panelists, we'll set some parameters here. So mobile and AI have not taken a back seat. If you look at the budgets that CIOs have planned out, the recent IDG survey, it shows that AI budgets have declined, mobile budgets have declined. It's not that it's not there, it's everywhere. It's infiltrated other areas. AI is in finance, AI is in HR, so it's spread across the company now. It's not just one enabling technology under this little window or under this umbrella. So it hasn't really declined. And you get the cybersecurity people, don't try to get them focused on it's a mobile problem. It's an infrastructure, it's a network, it's a problem that goes across the board. They should be focusing on best practices, compliance, regulation, governance, and that will spread throughout the company.
I would add too is that cybersecurity is the major part of AI. Cybersecurity is a major part of this tool that we're using every day. Is how so many hackers are getting into back doors of big companies and then getting into their CRM systems or their credit card transaction systems. So it might just be a shift in how you approach the importance of this tool, or align it with some of the cybersecurity concerns and budget dollars that are happening towards that, because it's how we access everything, right? So maybe it's just a shift in terms of the priority of what applications are running. You may say, you know what, you're really focused on cybersecurity on our network, but look, 90% of the data volume is happening with our remote workforce accessing these applications. So maybe it's just maybe an internal look at some of the things that are happening on the network and through the mobile devices to maybe tie it back in together, just to maybe stake your claim on that budget. I don't know how the budgets work at your organization, but I don't know how you get with one without the other. Cybersecurity is part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating, or one of the most fascinating spaces. I mean, all the different technologies that we're all seeing these days are pretty fascinating in general. But, you know, analytics as it pertains to security, you know, that's really how anomalous behavior is being detected these days. You know, when you look at a sophisticated type of implementation of analytics in a big organization. But, I mean, I think it's gotten to the point where organizations just need to really think about really identify what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish and what types of applications they own to determine what types of levels of security they need, because it can spread far and wide. If you're starting to get into different territories where, you're more reliant on web applications, for example, there's a whole new set of security concerns that come with that on a mobile device, right, or on any device, right? The device is really becoming not relevant as I think things go forward. So I mean, it's a pretty complex topic, and I know you're very much in tune with trends in this space, and you oversee part of the organization at Altria that does a lot of these things that are pretty progressive with security. But I just think right now it's just a very, very large headache because it's beginning to get more and more complex in terms of the different layered security that you require depending on what types of applications you're going to be using.
I just like seeing the huge competition inside of enterprises in terms of where they're spending their dollars, right? It's not easy thinking through what your priorities are. I think it's highly competitive, or it should be. And, I haven't met a CISO who says I have enough money, right? So, maybe there's something there that if they're able to prove that their story, that their need is greater than mobile or AI or somewhere else, either that means somebody else in your organization isn't telling their story well enough, or your CISO is. Now, what I like to see is when you're thinking about IoT, or you're thinking about AI, or you're thinking about some other part of your business that's going to show growth and show efficiencies and actually have a business impact, there's a corresponding security play in there. You're stretching your business in a place that isn't natural where you're operating today. And so if I'm putting something in IoT in there, I'm going to think about network security. Why? Because I'm doing something more faster, more volume, more data coming through my network than I've ever done before. If I'm doing more in AI than I've done before, then I'm thinking a lot about data security and how I'm masking data and how I'm distributing data across the organization so that people can have access to it to do experimentation. So any one of these investments is stretching your organization in a direction. It should be highly competitive because you can't easily invest in everything at the same time. So somewhere in there, there's a priority in terms of what makes sense, and then invest in security in parallel to that.
And you got to think more in terms of the implications too. Get people to start thinking about implications, think scenarios, because what's happening with AI and IoT and data analytics is things that can happen so fast. When we turn over control to a predictive system or intuitive system to make decisions without human intervention, I mean, one of our members in the council, one of our members is JPL, and this scares them to death. I mean, they're working on things like the Mars mission, and they are sitting on a huge pile of dark data that they don't dare throw away because there's a needle someplace in that haystack that's important. But this scares them. And I've talked to people at car manufacturers, at Ford, that are working on autonomous vehicles. And they give the scenario. Cars are programmed not to jam traffic around a rotary and keep all the cars spaced apart and everything's moving really smoothly. What happens when a dog runs across the road? What's the prime directive there? Keep the traffic moving? Can the dog be sacrificed? Can a human be sacrificed? You don't know. And that's what scares. No one's thinking about the implications of this stuff.
I want to go back to a question that was asked earlier about this idea of a pendulum swing of the centralization and decentralization. It seems that one of the things that's different now is that in the past 10 years, we've had the development of tools and notations and frameworks around the skill sets involved in enterprise architecture. In fact, I understand it to be that the promise of enterprise architecture is that it provides some kind of decision-making artifacts that allow you to have that centralized kind of framework for security and yet empowering individuals to work within that. So I guess I kind of have two questions. One is, what role do you guys see enterprise architecture playing in kind of helping to facilitate that? And from my experience looking at peers, enterprise architecture kind of has a 50-50 success record in delivering on that promise. So does it play a role? And if it does, why are we so bad at making it play a role?
Well, I'll give you my outline for the article I wrote just today on the plane over here is what is the role of the enterprise architect in agile organizations? Because coming up with standards is a job in itself, and coming up with methodologies is a job in itself, and it seems like it's in a disconnect with teams that really want to move fast, that want autonomy, that are self-organizing. And so if you take a step back and you ask some questions that teams in by themselves may not be able to do, you find a lot of places where architects can fill a role. Let's start with who in the organization prioritizes technical debt, right? Technical debt is the piece of your legacy that needs to be improved on. It's growing because the technology is changing, because things are scaling beyond what they originally intended to. And I like looking at the architects very much like looking at the product managers who are responsible for outcomes from a product or a business perspective. I like looking at the architects and saying, why are we going to prioritize a particular technical debt? Is it security? Is it performance? Is it reliability? Make a case to prioritize that one item over the 55 other things that the organization should go invest in. So that's one of the things I really like architects to be looking at. But then you get back into this question of, where are you standardizing platforms and where are you creating sandboxes for innovation and experimentation? And what divides those two lines? And how do you define those? And how do you make those accessible? And how do you define an approach so that multiple teams can put their APIs out and put out their microservices and there's interoperability between those two? How do you put out a data model so that more than one team can get access to it? So it's being used for not just the application, but it's also being used for the analytics on the other side of it. So if you look at and take your architects and say, let's focus on very specific problems that the aggregate of multiple teams working in parallel are going to have, and let's provide them solutions, and look at the development teams as customers, then you have a whole new role for architects to be playing out in this space.
And just that technical debt is an interesting term. It does apply, it does mean legacy systems. But you can also build technical debt by trying to take shortcuts. When you're doing DevOps or an innovative initiative and you try to take a shortcut, it's building technical debt, because at some other point in time, as you move forward, that's going to be a liability. So you have to watch that too. You have to have people thinking about that as well.
So I want to go back to security, and mind you, I understand security, I understand what we need to have and the importance of it, but at what point is there going to be a balance? And I asked a question based on, as a security team or a CISO puts more and more security in, it starts locking everything down. You get to a point where it's almost paranoia, where I have my customer service reps and some of my other folks who need to do some of the PC work, they can't do anything. Everything has to be done, release a GPO or do whatever it may be, and it becomes now my security costs go up, but my customer service costs go down because I'm trying to cut folks, but then I need more people because I have more and more security in place. So kind of where do you see where there's a balance between security and all-out paranoia?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think what I see is some vendors investing in pretty sophisticated security technologies around biometrics that hopefully will reduce some of the complexity in enabling the type of security that we need or require. But it's not there's no easy answer to that. From where I sit. There's too many variables at play for what you're trying to secure and the criticality of the data that you're trying to secure.
There's also some technologies that take that human bias out of the making decisions what's secure and what's not secure. So they're analyzing network traffic, they're analyzing usage patterns. They're saying you're in a particular group, you typically access the systems in this pattern, and they're flagging outliers. So I really like those systems because they operate at scale, right? And they take out the biased human decision making that says, this group shouldn't have access to something. Well, maybe they should, and then maybe this person's just acting a little bit outside of the normals for that particular group.
I think that's it.
Oh, you're out. roll.
All right, maybe some final words from our advisory board. What should we be thinking about? I think we covered a lot of trends. We've covered a lot of what's happening now. We've had a lot of good questions around some of the issues and challenges that our attendees are having today. But maybe what's down the road? What are some things that should be on the radar that you think that our attendees should maybe be ramping up on or really keep a close eye on?
I would say, I'll start, I'll just say empowering your users with better tools and better access to the tools they need is very, very possible with some of the, application delivery techniques that are available now. We've talked about a lot of these trends. We talked about low code, but it's really about, really streamlining the ability to push down an application and revoke access to that application, which can be done very, very easily now with the investment in the right platform and tools. And I think that those are very important things right now, given that the way the workforce is evolving and the way they're starting to become more and more reliant on that, endpoint for their day-to-day workflow.
Yeah, I'll be covering some of that in my keynote tomorrow, but I would say, I think we all understand what bad culture looks like. I think we have this vision of utopia of what really good culture looks like. But very few people really take the steps to say, we need to move our culture in this particular path to be able to do A, B, and C really well. And so I think that's going to be the next 5 years is going to be really the difference between really successful organizations and ones that are just stumbling along. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
And I would say think of the possibilities of technology beyond traditional technology. And I'll give you an example. So with most companies going to the cloud, even if it's a small company, it makes sense to go to the cloud because it's less expensive, it's less overhead, it's more efficient, it's more secure in some respect because if you're dealing with AWS, it's their concern to be more proactive in terms of security and it costs you less than trying to do it yourself. But one of the things that's happening with cloud is it's also driving M&A activity, the mergers and acquisitions. I talked to a company a few weeks ago that 3 or 4 years ago, he had 100 people working under him, the CIO. As they got into cloud enablement and they started looking at companies that had clouds, they started acquiring those companies and they were able to merge IT departments in a matter of weeks than a matter of months. To the point now he has 1,200 people working under him, and within 3 years he expects to have 2,000 people, and he has 135 cloud systems. But it just shows it's changing the scope of the structure of corporate America, or global corporations.
And I would add, just to reiterate what Vantic said, Blaine said, is that they need to become idea generators. So thinking above and beyond managing technology, right? But really thinking strategically about the business. And that's something that I know I mentioned earlier, but I think that that's a really good mind shift. It's a cultural shift, and it's something maybe you work with your teams on. Thinking about budgets, how do we get budget priority? Well, I think if you're thinking above and beyond the traditional role that IT gives and supports the organization, but thinking of it more of how do we enable customer services or improve our sales operations, those kinds of things might give you further clout in terms of your budget and really putting your stake in the game when it comes to fighting for your dollars, since that seems like it's something that's an ongoing issue with as you have different teams and you're fighting for budget.
Stephanie and our advisory board, thank you so very much. What a wonderful job.